Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the now, I believe, second panel of IGDA's and Take This's Game Development Crisis Conference and webinar series. I think we've got a really good one for you today with a fantastic panel of wonderfully experienced community managers. I am the clinical director of Take This, Dr. B. And if you don't know about Take This, we were the first mental health nonprofit to serve the game community. We've been doing what we've been doing since 2012. And we have a number of wonderful programs. Make sure to give if you can in the donation link below. But let's launch into this and let's talk to our fabulous panelists. Introduce yourselves one at a time. Why don't we start with who's on the upper left of my screen, Victoria.
Oh, that's me. Hello, I'm Victoria. I'm the communications director at Kitfox Games. We're a small indie team in Montreal, Canada. We're making games like Boyfriend Dungeon and Lucifer Within Us and publishing a game called Modern Museum and Door Fortress.
Awesome. Thank you, Victoria. Linda.
Hi, I'm Linda Carlson, and I have a small company called Mythos CEX, Customer Experience. I'm an independent contractor and consultant who works in community and customer relations. And I've been in the gaming industry for 20 odd years now, and it's been a wild ride.
Few changes over 20 years?
Oh, just a few. And, there's a lot to be said about online life, but all the changes have been to the better, really.
Oh, that's fantastic. Ruby.
Hi, I am Ruby Bear. I'm a content marketing manager for Guild Wars 2 at ArenaNet, and I want to be Linda when I grow up.
No, you don't.
Prevailing.
She's not wrong about the wild ride, but always so much fun.
Oh, that's amazing. That is amazing.
Yeah.
So before we get really into the meat of our discussion, I want to say to everybody who's joining us in the chat, and it looks like we've got a really wonderful, robust crowd in the chat. And thanks to Twitch Charity for promoting us on this one. If you have a question for our panelists, we will not be answering them immediately and directly, but our fantastic moderator, Renee Gittens, is going to be keeping track of those. So if you have a question for our panelists, please feel free to type it in with big capital letter question before your question so we can keep track of it a little bit easier. But first and foremost, since this panel is about community building, we hear the word community used all the time and in this nebulous sense, but let's get just an understanding of what it is. To each of you, what is community?
You're going to have to tell us what order to go in.
You just jump in, whoever. Linda, you seem to be the one everybody wants to be like when they grow up. Why don't you start off?
No pressure.
First of all, I should be a cautionary tale to you all. I can't pull out of this lifestyle because over the years, I fell into community accidentally as a career, but I have since learned that this is the core of our humanity. We are still little monkeys barely out of the trees in terms of time on Earth. And yet community is where we now form our tribes. We form our own social circles. We form our own families. And the internet is what has given us the ability to do that. We still have communities in what we refer to as the real life. Your church groups, your clubs, your social groups, your organizations. But increasingly, we are finding that we can broaden the pool of people that we draw from for our tribes and communities by being online. So community is wherever you find it. It's wherever you find people of like mind or places where you can actively debate things that you're passionate about. Community is humanity.
Yeah, I think at its core definition, the thing that I was thinking about this was you have this huge diverse group of people from all over the place who have rallied around a common interest as their foundation of their community, and it's that humanity, and everybody's coming from a completely different place and have found this one thing to cling to as a common interest.
Yeah, I think agree with both of your definitions of it, so I won't really expand on it. But I think the interesting thing is that as society has progressed, like we've lost a lot of the things that we used to have that would become communities, like the small towns or like the large families or like a church or something that kind of people rallied around. And I think games and especially online communities have given us that kind of space now to gather together over something.
Well, especially now, as so many, as we've entered this phase of now global existence, that we're seeing this level of mobilization that we haven't seen since World War II. Now our online communities have become more and more imperative. So, in addition to the use of the term community, we also hear a lot of buzz around the idea of building good community, but we don't hear a lot of definition about what good community is. So, for each of you, with your wealth of experience as community managers, what makes a good community?
I'm
Victoria.
not going first every time. Yeah, Victoria.
I was like, okay, Luna went first last.
I'll tell you what, I'll roll a die here, and
Excellent.
We're all
we'll
just trying to be polite.
Do
I
you
know.
have, Dr. Do you have dice?
generally within
That was
reach. Yes,
that was a sarcastic question.
You can just be a proper DM and pretend to roll a dice and then tell us what the results are.
all right.
Your
Yeah, no,
life
it's
is not
I rolled a D3. It came up a 6. Ruby, you go first.
Why am I 6? Okay, so a good community. I I'm just gonna argue everything, like a good player. I think it boils down to constructive. Not everybody has to agree all the time. Not everything has to be rosy and perfect and happy, but you have to want to keep that community on a constructive trajectory, not to tear it down. You can disagree passionately and loudly and constantly, and you can acknowledge that you come from different places, and you can be diverse, and you can be all over the map, and it can be rowdy, but it needs to be constructive, and you have to want your community to keep going and keep getting better and keep moving forward and not disintegrate.
So forward momentum, constructive
Yeah.
purpose.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I get really excited about don't tear it down. You have to want to build up, and that can be messy, and it can be confusing, and it can be all over the place, but you have to want it to get to a better place continually than where it is.
Mm, wonderful.
Yeah.
Victoria, what do you think?
Yeah, I think there's so many aspects to community, but overall, the overarching goal is to have a kind community that are kind to each other and kind to you, but also kind to people outside of their own group, let's say outside of the community itself. Essentially, I think like there's a goal kind of to create a very socially responsible and very culturally sensitive online community is sort of the way I think of community management. And I think having a positive community is one that reflects that and also kind of believes in the values that you put forth.
Linda?
Right. So for me, community is something that must be founded from day one on respect. And that usually means setting up rules and guidelines because God knows humanity cannot guide itself.
Yes.
There have to be, no, it's true.
Oh boy.
No,
When we're
you're
left
very
to our
right.
own devices, we're horrible people. If you think about the inner monologue that goes on in your own head, the only thing that you have is your conscience to guard what comes out of your face. However, online that tends to happen less. So establishing rules that govern respectful behavior is important. And then right after that comes the community must be supported. I don't care if this is a fan group for bird watching, for violent PvP games, for monster truck rallies, whatever the group is for, it has to be supported. And that does mean community managers combined with community leaders that evolve out of the community who are going to be your right-hand people. You will get, like in a tribe, you might have elders. In communities that we form online, you're going to have the elders that step forward from the community who have that calming voice, who have the ability to nurture and help you grow the community in a healthy way. So the combination of respect and support is very, very important. Please, game companies, if you're out there, make sure that you support your communities. Don't just let them to go wild because they go feral really fast and it's not pretty and it's not healthy for anyone.
It's
Well,
not going to go well.
something you said, there's a fantastic chapter in a psych book called Getting Gamers, written by Dr. Jamie Madigan. And he talks about the online space and combinations of things that lead to this sort of wild behavior that you talk about. And it's often a combination of anonymity It's a combination of peer influence, and it's a combination of a lack of repercussions. And so how, as a community manager, do you combat those essentially?
Rules and zero tolerance for asshattery.
Okay,
I mean,
zero
you
tolerance for
really,
ass hattery.
you you have to establish those guidelines right away, because as humans, we do tend to revert to feral behavior. And okay, so let me just say that the underlying rule for me is to accept and understand that the behavior we see of humanity at its worst is normal. It's what we do. We are hardwired evolutionarily to be these types of things. We want to be better, and we're generally better when we have guidelines that help us stay on track. That's why we have laws, that's why we have governments, that's why we have religions. They are all working in an effort, for better for worse, to try to improve us and give us guidelines as humans. But you have to immediately establish that you will not tolerate some things that we as a group, as a species, we have come in civilized times not to tolerate racism. As a rule, there are still places where racism is just fine and encouraged. The same with hate speech against any group, against multiple genders and that sort of thing. There are still places in this world where that is totally encouraged. Not in the communities that we manage. We really need to be in the vanguard, in our small way, in our humble way of helping humanity evolve as a whole. And that's a multi-generational process. And we've been killing each other for hundreds of thousands of years, and for all the wrong reasons. I'm going to get off on a tangent now, because that's also what community managers do. The only thing that's keeping this on the rails is we're not sitting around a table with a couple of beers, because otherwise you'd never keep us on topic. Someone must jump in now.
Well, I was about to kick back with popcorn and just enjoy.
No, it's good. If I can build on that just a little bit, establishing those guidelines and establishing those rules from the outset instead of trying to mop up the blood later is so incredibly important, because another facet of that is that peer pressure and modeling the behavior that you want to see in your community. Something that we established in our community in Guild Wars 2 from the very beginning was a very clear set and a very actionable set of rules and regulations and how we wanted to see our community behave. And we laid that out from the beginning. And what we saw was people would come in from other communities or come in from no community and just come in and be like, oh, this is the internet. This is clearly how we're supposed to behave. And we would step in immediately, and we had those guidelines to point to and just simply say, look, I understand you're new here. This is not what we do. And we would say that kindly, not in a way to shame them, but in a way to make them understand we want you here. You're welcome here, but this is how we do things here, because we want everyone to feel welcome. And we would establish that in a very public way, in a way that made them feel welcome within our guidelines. And we modeled that behavior. And what we saw very quickly was that the rest of the community started modeling that behavior too. And it leveraged that peer pressure in a good way, which is that aspect of community, showing the rest of the community and showing the newcomers, here's how we do things here. And if you establish that from the outset, your community can help you work in your favor in that way. And it's so important to get off the ground on the right foot.
For sure. I think there's so much to be said about the role of community managers as being a role model for like kind of the way that a community should interact, because, you know, whatever you do basically is seen as this is acceptable in this community. And that being said, like not just being this like high and mighty like community manager here to like, oh, you're breaking the rules, you're banned now, but also being a part of the community and being and interacting with them and getting to know them and adapting, because I don't think every community is the same. Everyone has their different, you know, contexts and, you know, rules and all of that. But that being said, there's so much importance in rules, but I think a lot of the times I've seen community managers struggle between like, you know, rule breaking is actually really easy to figure out. Like someone's being a racist, ban them. There's the other thing that's like the more norms and like folkways and ways of interaction that's like that was okay technically, but that was kind of rude. And I think those like little moments are the ones that actually kind of create the seed of like, I guess like unkindness and things that we aren't looking for in communities. And I think knowing in your gut and knowing with your mods like what is acceptable behavior and encouraging the kind of mood that you want in your community is very important, and not just like set rules, because I think there's going to be so many different variations of how people interpret them that knowing the kind of overall arching goal you have is very important.
So it sounds like you're breaking this down not only from the letter of the law, so to speak, but also the spirit of it as well, and how.
Right.
And I
Very
know,
much.
Victoria, you and I have talked about this, how, and I know this is core to your community management philosophy, that you need to be of the community as well as enforce the rules. That this, you basically, by your actions, you model the spirit of those rules.
Right.
So, one of the things that has been alluded to is the idea that there isn't just internet community. There isn't just internet culture as a monolith, that there is this idea of every community, every game community, every fandom has a different vibe to it. How do you go about curating that and supporting that in a healthy way?
That's actually not that difficult. I think it comes naturally. Well, I've worked for two large companies that had multiple games. At Sony Online Entertainment, we managed 6, 8, 9 games depending on the year, and Tran Worlds as well, 6 games there. And it's a matter of, even when you have two games that are quite similar, if we take EverQuest and EverQuest 2, for instance, those communities were very different. And that's surprising to me because it's the same game world, very similar game structure, and yet the communities that built up were different, and they had different interests and different ways of communicating. And EverQuest 1 tended to be more role-playing. EverQuest 2 was more about stats. So the way you talk to any individual community is going to change. And as soon as you switch to that community, there's a little switch that goes off in your mind. You know that there are different topics, different areas of interest, different challenges, and different community leaders that you're working with in each community. So it's like assuming different personas in a play, for instance, and it does come naturally. I will say that there are also some communities that no, we'll get into this topic later. There are some toxic communities, and we need to talk about those as well, and why that's a problem for our species in general.
Okay, no, we're going to definitely get into what qualifies as problematic behavior and toxic behavior.
We get to go for 4 hours, right? The stream goes for 4 hours.
Well, that's when we get into the happy
say.
hour time.
That's for later with the beers that you were talking about.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
of course.
But Ruby, I know that you and Victoria are managing communities for very different games. Very different games, and I'm assuming that those communities have very different vibes. How do you curate that and maintain that in a way that is supportive of the common interests, as y'all put it earlier?
So honestly, even within a single game, and I recognize I'm a little bit spoiled. I have one game and one community that I have to deal with. Even within that, there are all of these sub-communities, and Linda hit the nail on the head. She described it so well. There is that switch that flips, and depending on, I'll go into a sub-community of our game, and I'll be working with like our moderators in our forums, and they'll come to me to check something and say, and they'll have a question about, hey, there's this, and I'm not really sure how to deal with it. Can you look? And I'll go over there and I'll oh, well, that's that community. This is and that switch clicks. Oh, yes, that's because this is this community. It's handled differently than over here because it is a very different sub-community. So even within a single game, there are all of these little divisions that change things.
Yeah, and I think like so in my case, like we have multiple games, and I think the most stark contrast I have is like Dwarf Fortress and Boyfriend Dungeon. And for like those that don't know, it's like Dwarf Fortress, very technical, it's very two different communities, and they all talk differently and they have different interests. Even like demographics, I think, are very much shifted. But there is that kind of switch that everyone has been talking about. But I think I think we're kind of downplaying the importance and how difficult it is actually to have soft skills and how vital it is, right? It's one of those things where I think a lot of people think like, oh, soft skills, like, yeah, you just need to know how to talk to people. Like, no, it's not just knowing how to talk to people. It's knowing exactly how they work and kind of being able to shift gears and know how to communicate with them in a way that they understand. And I know that there's always been that like golden rule, like treat others the way they want you would want to be treated. But I think there's like the platinum rule, which is you treat others the way they want to be treated. And I think that's where soft skills come in. And the importance of having a good community manager is that they know exactly how to tackle all different kinds of people, no matter what situation you put them in. So I think that's kind of the way I would go at it.
So what
I could do 4 hours on soft skills.
Well, let's define those. Let's define those for somebody who might not be familiar with what you mean by soft skills in our chat. What do you mean?
Empathy, understanding. Really, community management is one of the few fields in which a psych degree is actually useful. And also, I've hired a lot of teachers into community management for the same reason. They tend to be people who have a lot of empathy and understanding. You must understand how someone thinks in order to really interact with them and to be able to act on that understanding and adjust your expectations of them as a human being too. So those are, I'll just leave it at that and let somebody else comment.
Well, one of the thing, and you're actually tapping into something that is a part of one of the workshops that Take This offers community management teams. And one of the ways we define empathy within that workshop is being able to reflect back to someone their own experiences, not condoning it, not agreeing with it, not
Absolutely.
colluding with it, but simply being able to state, here's what you're experiencing from my perspective. Tell me if I'm right.
Mm-hmm. And also expressing that you understand. Again, you must understand and accept before you can help somebody, whether it's helping them get over a crisis or whether it's helping them evolve to be a member of the community who is more constructive. I mean, there are so many aspects of it, but I think what we're really in this business for is to help people. And this sometimes runs counter to what, especially in game companies, where their sole interest, of course, is making as much money as possible. But the more you help and grow and nurture your communities, the more loyal they're going to be to the company and to the community that they are a part of, because it does become a very important part of their social existence and their family. Really, it's an extended family.
So, how now that Linda has really broached the topic of crisis, let's talk about that, because there are a variety of social relationships that exist within an online community, and this is not something generally our parents teach us the rules for interacting with. You know, for many of us, you say please and thank you at the dinner table. These are rules we are definitely taught as children. But I can't think of any parents that I know who definitely say, this is what you do online. This is how you identify a friend online. This is the role of a community manager. How do you deal with people coming to you in either emotional crisis, medical crisis? Because I know you've all gotten those messages.
I want to start with just an acknowledgement that that stuff is uncomfortable and scary, and that's okay. And that those first emotions. They're uncomfortable feelings that it can be tempting to turn away from and be like, I don't know how to deal with this. I'll pawn it off on somebody else. And that's that first thing that we have to learn how to get over.
The discomfort of being in unusual situations.
Yeah, and it can feel overwhelming.
Absolutely. Linda, what do you like?
Yeah, you can. It's terrible. I love to talk and share opinions, and I just want to thank you guys for inviting me on here, because every time I'm on a panel like this, I learn so much. So really, just tell me where to send the payments for my education here. when you're dealing in a time of crisis, I think people who stay in community management for the long term are people who thrive on it, who thrive in going from a nurturing role into a leadership role and helping other people learn how to cope. And that is important. The other thing is that if we're talking about personal crises, we go back to empathy and understanding. What is an absolute crisis for one person, other people would look over there and go, you gotta be kidding me. What is your problem? And it's important to note that it is important to this other person. If you think about your little sister or something, when she drops her ice cream, that is a heartrending moment for a 4-year-old. As an adult, we just go, well, crap, and we go buy another one. But for that 4-year-old, the new ice cream might not even be the same as the ice cream that fell. And understanding that crisis is different for every individual, and being willing and able and psychologically prepared to accept a leadership role to help other people learn to adapt, to get through the grief, the anger, the denial, whatever they're feeling. And believe me, this can come from an innocuous game update that changes one class. That is a crisis for some people who say they've been playing a game for 4 years. Suddenly this has changed. That's the end of a part of their world. And we have to understand that it is important to them and deal accordingly. Now, if you've suddenly got 500 people who think it's the end of the world, it's not just managing how angry, upset, or grief-stricken they are. It's also being able to take that information and convey it to the development teams, because I know that we're really talking about game communities in specifically here as well. So there is a tremendous amount of communication, translation, and understanding that both sides of any equation are going to have different needs and expectations.
And that comes back to the soft skills that Victoria mentioned, that, the idea of being able to shift between the needs of others with compassion, with understanding, and essentially be a liaison between those and communicate those needs effectively and diplomatically.
It is definitely a diplomat's role. Yeah.
I think on a one-on-one situation, which I think is something that you had mentioned, part of what you were focusing on was when a person in our gaming community is coming to you with a crisis, or talking about within the community, talking about a personal crisis they're having, something that's wrong. And this is something that we talked about back at PAX East, when we were working together, and some of our Guild Wars 2 staff talked about things that they went through. It goes back to what Linda had expressed really well about being able to make sure that they really, really understand that we are hearing what they're going through and that we are reflecting back to them. We understand what you're saying, and we do understand what you're feeling. You are being heard. You're not just talking to a wall. And that is an enormously difficult and enormously important soft skill that it takes nothing more than experience, and in my experience has been a trial and error and learning through experience way of developing. I feel like that's one of the most important foundational skills in that particular scenario.
So, Victoria, I want to give some special love to a wonderful article that you have recently posted on
Yeah, it's awesome.
ethical
Everybody should
community
read it.
management. And no, it truly
Thank you.
it's really wonderful, and I'm curious how you would take some of the lessons that you talk about in that article and apply that to managing the individual or even group crises within the community.
Yeah. So for anyone who doesn't know, I don't think we even named the article. It's called Ethical Community Management in a Struggling World. And it's an article that went up yesterday and that I wrote because we're currently in a global crisis right now, and it's hard to figure out what to do as a community manager when you yourself are feeling a form of grief, I guess. And in the article, I referenced an article that called it like anticipatory grief or something, of things that are
Which
going
is
to
a great
change.
article in and of itself.
Yeah, it's super great. And it's like the feeling of safety is suddenly gone, and now you're in charge of a community that's feeling a lot more anxious, feeling a lot more on edge, and you also are feeling all of these things, right? And how do you manage that? So my thoughts on it was that I think there's things that we as community managers are very good at doing, and that is the soft skills, but that is also communicating different things into, like, complicated subjects into more actionable and easy to understand ideas and things to do. So I think the role of community managers, especially in a crisis situation, is one, as much as you can, like if it's like a game community thing with bugs, that's like, while you're in a good mind space, having a sort of template for you to follow for like when you have that heightened emotional state that you can look at and be like, okay, like here's how I'm going to handle this. And that's for like, things that maybe you can plan are going to happen. When it comes to a global crisis that no one was expecting, I think the thing here is that to understand that no one really knows what they're doing, and you don't need to be this like superhuman doing all the marketing things and also being really kind. It's like, no, the main focus right now is just being a support system, helping everyone become a support system for each other, and understanding your own boundaries and taking a break when you need it. Yeah, that's kind of like my thought process on it.
And this actually, want to take a moment to remind the folks in chat. Thank you. I can see it's been really robust in the chat. If you have a question for our panelists, we're going to take some questions in the last 15 minutes of this panel. Just please proceed your question with big, bold cap letters, question, so our mods can relay that to us a little bit more effectively. But Victoria, you brought up a really important point right now, and I think we all need to talk about this. So far, the questions and the discussion topics have focused on supporting the community outside of you. This is a hard job. Empathy requires a lot of effort. Understanding requires a lot of effort. How do you support yourself and your mods? And a big collective sigh happened. Yeah,
that sigh was
okay.
perfect.
I want to start by giving an enormous shout out to the team that I work on. We have all been supporting each other since we started working from home at the beginning of March. And I feel like that is, I cannot overstate how important it is to have a supportive, understanding team that you are a part of. We have all just been it's just been this endless refrain of, it's okay to be tired, it's okay to be scared, and I'm gonna cry. It's okay to take a break, it's okay to take care of yourself.
It's okay to cry.
Yeah, no, stop. No, quit it. And, I became extremely protective of my work-life balance a couple years ago. And that has, at the end of my workday, I am done unless I'm on call. That's very different. But that has stood me in good stead. At the end of my workday, I tell everybody good night. I log off. But that is surrounding yourself with a supportive team makes a world of difference. Who understands that, hey, this is scary. It's okay. We're in a weird environment. Working from home is not kicking back in your pajamas and watching The Office. It's
not?
hard. Okay, not for all of us. Shh, don't tell them. No, it is, but it's not a vacation, and having people that understand that and support you in that and tell you it's okay to not be okay all the time is incredibly important.
So basically reminders that it's okay to feel things.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the things that the coronavirus pandemic has really brought to a point for people around the globe, is that it's more than just your work. And I'm often on career panels for people who want to get into the game industry. And one of the things I always tell them is choose your company and your team well. If you're working for a company or a team that treats you like dirt, does not acknowledge that humans have needs, does not acknowledge the requirement for work-life balance and mental health, leave. I mean, you'll be better off working in a fast food drive-through than ruining your life and your health working for a company that doesn't understand these things. But again, I do think that this pandemic has, you got to look for silver linings where you can, right? And I think it really has made people realize what's important in life, especially as we start to see people around us that we personally know starting to fall to this disease. We've become used to things like cancer. That's a tragedy, and we know that it's very difficult to overcome. But the suddenness of coronavirus and how quickly it can rob people from us has really made a lot of people rethink the way that they're running their lives. And from that perspective, for at least one generation, I think we have all learned an important lesson. You do have to look after yourself. I learned long ago that I was a farmer in the old days. I still have a farm now because it's very important to me when things are going very wrong and people are screaming and devs are unhappy and the peasants are revolting, everything's going wrong. I can walk out there and there's this green pasture and there's a herd of pigs sailing by with not a care in the world in their little family groups. They're happy. They don't care. They're not involved in this stuff. And it brings me back into contact with reality. Not everybody gets to deal with farm animals, and I wish they could. Anybody who can have chickens, get some chickens. They're enormously entertaining, plus the eggs are a wonderful, amazing gift every morning, and they're quite happy for you to have them too. But it is more important now than ever to look after our mental health. The other thing I'm going to say, we talked, I might even have been before this cast began, about the fact that online communities and gaming communities have evolved, and I said in a very positive fashion. One of the things that we have discovered over the years is that people are becoming more and more open about the mental health challenges that every single human faces. I don't care how well adjusted and how wonderful your life is, there are going to be moments when you are challenged. And if you really are one of those superlatively lucky Pollyannas who really can get through it, you know that you are supporting people who are going through crisis all the time, and they will turn to you because they think you have the answers. Mental health is no longer the massive stigma that it used to be. And anytime we're managing a crisis, we have to remember that there are people at various stages of physical and mental health involved. So things are changing. And see, look at that. I just got off on another tangent. I'll just look over here now. Somebody else start talking.
No, it's great. We love it. We love it.
It's fantastic.
Anna goddess. It's great.
You're never going to invite me back.
No, please, I love you. Yeah, I think all of them were great points. It's just I think a lot of it is, one, everyone has their own, kind of hashtag self-care ways to do it, and not just like, ooh, I'm going to buy something online and that's self-care, but actually taking the time for yourself and reflecting. But I will speak from I'm a little bit newer to the games community, and I never knew I was going to be in games. So when I first joined, I really pushed myself in a way that was like, I need to prove myself and I need to be here, and everyone has all this experience and I don't, so I better do something about it. And I think, and then obviously crash and burn, got really burnt out, etc. And I think there's a lot to be said about extending the generosity you give to others to yourself, to like forgive yourself if, like I did screw up, like I was preaching self-care and then I screwed up. It happens. And I think it's a process of learning and figuring it out. And I've seen so many tips and people talking about burnout and talking about, like, as a community manager, you should be doing this and this. And I'd be like, okay, yeah, no, I don't need to remove the apps from my phone. That's like for someone else. And then figure out, oh no, I actually do need to do that, right? I think it's a long trial and process thing, and people they're going to give you advice, and it's great advice, but definitely figuring out what works for you as a community manager is very important.
And you bring up you bring up a really valuable point about the individual nature of our needs, that there is no one size fits all answer. If there were, I would have no student loans left. But you're talking about a trial and error approach, taking an amalgamation of other people's tips and then trying them out, learning what works, learning what doesn't work. But also, it sounds like your needs evolved over time. maybe early on in your career, you didn't need to remove all the apps. But at this point, no, boom, I'm done. I'm out. Do not need those apps on my phone. So it sounds like all of your needs have been changing and evolving, and you've had to roll with that, which presents a new challenge.
Mm-hmm.
So what
Definitely.
I know this is something I want to know. Like, if you have one or two tips about your self-care for the audience, what would you tell them?
Okay, my first one is have friends that are outside of games who don't care about games at all. You try to tell them about like any sort of game, they're like, I don't. It's a blank. It's a blank. I think being able to define yourself, especially since this career is so much like it is both your hobby and your career, having something outside of that and being able to define yourself outside of that is so important. And I found having friends just not interested in games at all has been very helpful for me as my like number one tip. And my number two tip is to be okay. Or I mean, this is going to be very difficult. It's easy to say right now, but it happened over time. It's to totally be okay with being offline for a bit. No one's going to forget you if you don't tweet on Twitter for like the next 5 minutes, right? Like the minute I'm done work at like 5 p.m., I'm like, I'm out. Discord, don't talk to me. They know this at this point. Like the great thing is like once a community gets used to your time zone, they're like, okay, so like at 5 p.m., Victoria's probably not going to answer. If anyone comes in with questions, we're just going to tell them you can wait until the next day. And it's such a relief to have that. So I think setting your own boundaries and sticking to it, even when you don't want to, is really important.
Have a hobby that you love that is not also your job. And which kind of ties into the have friends that aren't also gamers. Bonus points if you can do that in Seattle also. Because that's harder than, hey, I'm not wrong.
No, you're not wrong. No, Seattle's a weird place. I was born and raised
Seattle
here.
a weird
I know
place?
it's weird.
Seattle it's kind of like gamer mecca. There's just a lot of us here. I managed to find some mom friends who aren't gamers, and then they were like, oh, but my husband works at Microsoft. And I was like, well, of course he does. No, but have hobbies that are not your job, that you don't also get paid to do. I am outside in my garden honestly, probably the second we're done here. I am outside in the garden because I want to be and not because somebody's paying me to do it.
For me, it is continuing to encourage the industry to step outside of the online 24/7 culture, because that's still a thing. There's still a lot of pressure for community managers to do that. And no, these are for-profit industries. Spend the money, pay people. You can get people at a very affordable rate of pay. There are numerous companies that do this sort of thing to cover the off hours so that your community manager can go home, rest, and recharge. Yep. Now, the other tip is that I'm going to go back to the one size does not fit all. My closest friends are people in the gaming industry. And I like to go to them with my various rants, raves, and tears, because they totally understand where I'm coming from. They've been there. They know that. They work in different areas of the game industry. But for me, that is an incredibly important outlet. And there's probably a couple of them sitting in the chat now, right now, going, yes, we could get you fired 10 times over for the things you told us. And it's true. You have to have a safe space. Everyone needs a safe space. So, find one. If you don't have a safe space, hit me up on Facebook. I'm not hard to find. I'm quite happy to listen to people rant and rave, because we have to do that to help us keep our sanity. And yes, get a hobby. I paint miniatures. I have a farm. I'm an artist. I have too many hobbies. Sleep is lovely. Happy hour at 5 p.m. every day while the pandemic's on.
Hey. I think both of those are, I don't think it's a hard one or the other. It's incredibly important to have non-gaming friends who don't understand and don't care. I honestly grew up with that. This is kind of a weird soccer mom job to have. This is a strange career for a soccer mom. So I was like in pickup line with all the moms kind of, so what do you do? And I was like, well, um, but they're not going to understand when this is a hard job. This is a draining job, and they're not going to get it when I rant. Linda's going to get it. Linda's going to get it when we're standing there at a table and there's beer and I am yelling about something. And so you need both of those. It's very important.
Yeah, for sure.
So it sounds like more for a lot of you, there are a couple of themes running through this. One is being able to separate. I actually,
So much.
I have a pet peeve about the term work-life balance because work is a part of life. When I teach these skills to studios and other folks, I actually use the term work-home separation because just having a boom cut off. And it sounds like all of y'all are talking about exactly that, being it whether it's from a schedule, whether it's your social groups, whether it's having hobbies that are not your passion and also your job. You need to find some sort of way of separating out from your career in order to have those restorative effects. At the same time, having friends who understand your stresses, who understand your frustrations, is an equally valuable thing to have.
Okay, I love that term.
Yes, that's
Dr.
great.
B, you're reflecting and repeating back to us what we've been saying.
It's
I
like
feel
high
heard and
school.
understood.
Whoa.
The wisdom. Oh.
This is so meta.
It's almost like I was trained to do this.
My goodness.
Were you? Tell us more.
Yes.
Oh God. Oh, that's a pet. Oh God. Oof. And how does that make you feel? Oh God. But so as we're about to go to some of the audience questions, but
Yeah.
before we do that, if our chat and our hundreds of viewers could leave this only knowing one thing, what would you want it to be?
Ooh.
We're all in this together. It is very, very important to understand that we really are all in this together. And I do think that online worlds, from the time I started playing, they have evolved a lot to a greater acceptance, mutual support, and understanding.
Similarly, we are all as a human race, not as different nationalities, different genders. We are all as a human race trying to figure this out right now. We don't understand. It's okay to be scared and angry and frustrated and confused. Just be kind.
Yeah. I think it's kind of same as the kindness things, but it's just that it's not impossible to build communities, have technology, and have a moral system and compassion to go along with it. I don't think those two are different things. I think when we create things, when we use technology, we can, if we try to integrate more ethics and morals into it, I think that is what's going to help us in the long term.
So create a system, and our ethics and morals don't have to be separate. Kindness and compassion, and understanding the ambiguity of the current situation and feeling things about that are okay.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Wow.
Go
So
us.
let's well, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
sorry.
poignant.
just don't worry about it.
Authenticity is wonderful. But so let's go to some of the questions that we have from the chat over the course of the last 45 minutes. If we can get some of those up in our chat, that would be wonderful. I see one already for all of you. That how do you deal with setbacks to the community? And this is from Winter Charm. At times where major community disappointment occurs.
Okay, so here we're dealing with something that is a process, and really, and it sounds awful to say it, but it's the same process as when you lose a loved one. There are the 7 stages of grief. That actually can be applied to any major disappointment. There is the the anger, the denial, the eventual acceptance. And what you try to do is you try to keep people talking through it as they adjust to the new normal. And I think this can be held true for any crisis that a community might go through, is you keep the communication going, you get people to express all of their feelings, you get people to start seeing new avenues of approaching the situation, and you just allow them to grow through the process. But it takes a lot of communication, and that's active communication. And this is where, as Ruby and Victoria have both said, you have to be part of the community. You have to be part of the process to help guide the discussions and let people discover for themselves how they really feel and how they can see a way past this. And with a community crisis in a gaming community, you are going to lose some of those community members, and they might go out with a spectacularly negative bent. But your job is not worrying about what they're doing. Always wish them the best wherever they go. But your job, your role, is to keep the rest of the community moving in a forward direction.
Yeah, honestly, that's perfect.
I don't have anything to add to that. That's perfect.
Yep.
And Linda dropped the mic. So to summarize some of that, you're treating this any sort of group disappointment as an ongoing process, not a solitary solution, but an ongoing process where people are going to move through. And you referenced Kubler-Ross's stages of grief, where people are going to move through different experiences, maybe at different rates, and you're going to lose some folks. But as long as you view it as an ongoing process and not a one-time solution, you're going in the right direction.
Yeah, the community is never static.
Never. No.
There's no static community. Okay. We've got another one from Michaela DD that if you only have where do you find your effort matters most? Like if you have only 2 hours a day, or excuse me, 2 hours on community management per week, what would you do during that time?
Find a new job.
I like that we all made like the same wrinkled brow face. Like, what?
I have had rules like that where yes, you have 2 hours a week and you're supposed to go in and make a difference. It is very, very difficult if the company that you're working for does not recognize the need for ongoing steady communications. You can't just drop in and post a couple of memes and run off. That's not how a community is built. And I'm sorry that you work for a company like that. I have done that before too, for the almighty dollar, and I've gotten out of them as quickly as possible because it's not serving the community's needs. But if you do only have 2 hours a week, and again, I've done it.
For our content creators. Like for people who, let's say for our content creators who that's just part of their job and they have so many other roles, or indie studios where you wear many hats. Like how do you do that in 2 hours?
All you can do is try to provide meaningful, conversational, supportive communications. What I'll usually do is I'll find a good thread that's going and add some comments to it, especially to reward the people who are in the good threads, and just try to support the people, the elders in the community who are an integral part of the community, because basically they're doing the job for your company. And so your role ends up being to support them if all you've got is 2 hours a week.
I think a little bit of a tangent on that is under constraints like that, you find those elders like Linda mentioned, you find your content creators, you find the people that you can bolster, and you support those people and you give them a boost, you give them a bump, you push them forward, and you give them some momentum to keep them going until you get 2 more hours. And you let them help you carry that weight.
Yeah, I think if we're speaking from like the indie development kind of thing, I totally understand the time constraints, because I've seen like solo devs like be like, I literally have no time to work on a community, and that's totally understandable. In that case, usually I would say, yeah, you will find your community champions. You'll find those people who are really enthusiastic about your game, but you still need to find them, and you still need to build a space for them and make sure it's a good space for them. So you will need to actively carve out a chunk of your week, one like for like a month, like maybe for like 1 week, like you put in more than 2 hours, and that means maybe your game is going to be delayed slower. Like you can't do the programming thing you want to do, you can't do the art thing you want to do, but you need to carve out more time for community because it doesn't just come out from nowhere, for sure.
Yeah, this question is stressing me out.
Well, no, 2 hours a week, I can't.
Well, I think it's important. Like, how many people do we know who are running solo studios, and how many people do we know who are having,
It's
they
tough.
have burgeoning YouTube careers or burgeoning, streaming careers, and they are trying to wear all of those hats themselves. And I think something you brought up, Victoria. What's that, Linda?
Word of advice to them: you can't do it alone. Nobody can do this stuff alone.
Help.
Yeah, you even if it's volunteers, and volunteers come with their own sets of problems, but you cannot do it alone. There is just, community is an investment in time, and you get out of it what you put into it, for sure. And so, you might find that your community champions really want a more active role. Give them a free account, do whatever it takes, give them more insights. People are always afraid of losing control, but unless you involve some of these people in your organization, you're going to die of overwork. Nobody can do it all.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was going for with find those creators, find those community champions, and let them help you pull that load.
And Victoria hit on something that has also been touched upon in the last hour, and that's there's upfront work. There's an upfront investment in that time that maybe it gets to the point where you can do less because you've literally built up a community who can support, the efforts that you're trying to do. But it requires upfront investments that might seem steep at the time, but pay off down the road.
Right.
For sure.
Okay. Let's see here. Do we have any other questions about community management from our community before we start signing off? Well, here's one from Little Donkey, whose name I just love. How do you make a community healthy again? In whatever sense of the word you take that as, if it has already gone off the rails.
Yep.
How do you repair a community?
Well, it depends on the company you're working for. So first of all, talk to the people in the company and convince them by whatever means necessary that the toxic element that has ruined your community needs to go now. We do not need those people as customers because they poison the experience for hundreds of others of people, literally hundreds.
Yeah.
Therefore, the 0.5% of the playing population, according to my own calculations done over 20 years, I don't have a scientific study, but that's the number I've come with. Get rid of them, turf them, and then start engaging with your community in a healthy way. And it's going to take time, but focus on the positive, support the good threads, weed out the bad ones, and do not be shy to fire the customers who are ruining the experience for a huge number of others.
The customer is always right does not mean what some people say it means.
No. Because it's the 99 customers, not that one that's causing a problem that you should be looking after. But it is very time consuming to bring a community back around. So again, it's a time investment, lots of communication.
So there's more processes. It's as if this is, once again, no one solution, no, push the button and everything. Well, it is another process.
Absolutely.
Rooting out that toxic element. Yeah, rooting out that toxic element is absolutely your first step. But after that, you are kind of steering the Titanic back onto course. And it's hard and it takes a long time, but it is absolutely worth it. And it's not going to feel great sometimes. It's going to feel discouraging. It's not hopeless. It might feel that way, but you're going to have to keep at it. And that's something that you mentioned a minute ago. About that initial, a lot of investment. And I'm thinking about the flywheel theory. I don't know if anybody's read that, where you have a lot of these tiny, think of an actual flywheel. You have a lot of tiny little pushes to get it going, and building up that momentum until it's moving on its own. You're going to have to give
Mhm.
all of those tiny little pushes and reinforce constantly. Yes, this is how it was before. That is not how it is now.
Right.
And continually reinforcing that against what's probably going to be a lot of pushback. And eventually that you're going to see that tide turn. And you're just going to have to do that.
Victoria, I'm going to give you the last word on this.
I mean, they've already said
Make
so
it good.
much. Oh God. Oh, now the pressure's on. God, I'm not a mic drop person. Yeah, I think the thing is that I work with smaller communities, but it's the thing where like, yeah, the most toxic people actually usually take up the most space. And they usually push out the people who will talk more, but they're just talking the most of other people not into it. And I think the thing is that there's so many game communities out there that the minute someone doesn't like yours, they can turn around and go to someone else. And understanding that there will be a high turnover rate when you completely change the rules and change the mood of the place, and that is going to be okay, and that it's okay to lose people and to start from square one almost. Overall, again, you're working towards building a better place for more people and to overall put in more net good than just being a passive role person in the community, and I think that's important.
Agreed.
So that is a great note to end this on. So thank you three for your wealth of experience and your knowledge and your collective, I believe, like 35 years of experience between the three of you in the game community. Thank you, chat, for being so active and having such
Yeah, thank you
wonderful
guys.
questions. And if you like the kind of content that Take This is helping with the IGDA to produce, please feel free to go to the link below and donate to Take This's ongoing mental health efforts. We will be back next Thursday with another wonderful panel on various industry matters. And we'll be doing so for the next, I believe, 4 more weeks. And so we'll look forward to seeing everybody back here. Make sure to subscribe to the IGDA's channel so you get updates. And we will talk to you all later.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone.